No. Okay. Very good. Okay, so yes. So what I wanted to show you today is actually I'm going to fill in a bit what Monsieur said before, Mr. Paul. What I think you're using is what's called Retrieval Augmented Generation, which is something people talk about a lot, and it's been used since I think the first time I happened upon it was when Bing started using it for their search results. Sorry, that they started augmenting their AI in their browser by first making a web query and then giving the response back to the chat session, and then it kind of did what the chat session usually does. So what the GPT does is that it kind of summarized it into natural language, and sometimes even gave you, again, backlinks to and references back to the sources. So what is Retrieval Augmented Generation? Well, in most cases, it's the following thing happens. And I've made this wonderfully instructive. I spent many minutes on this. So what actually happens in most cases, and I will show you this in real-world example, very much something that looks like, not as fancy as what Paul showed you, but something that I whipped together. What happens, first of all, is that the book, as we know it, needs to be turned into something that can be used by the, first of all, by the database that stores the book for what's called semantic search. And this is the first place. This is far to the left. We give the book to a language model, like OpenAI, for example. And that gives us back what's called an embedding, which is the most arrays of numbers you've ever seen. If you ever get to lay your eyes on it, it's going to be like a massive set of numbers, representing basically, but depending on what kind of AI model you use to create the embedding, it's going to be a numerical representation of what's in your book, the text contents. And also for each word, in many cases, the similarity to other words within the language model. Meaning that in the end, you can actually ask questions which are not keyword searchy. You can use synonyms and so on. You can speak around a subject, and it will, thanks to the language model again, it will pick up your meaning and return results from the book back to, whatever. It doesn't need, in many cases, we use it to feed back to a language model. This is not the only way of handling this. The reason I started experimenting with this was to add semantic search for blind readers, because a blind reader has a hard time scanning content and asking or using keyword search. That's what I learned. So I thought, well, I'll just add a vector database to the mix, and suddenly you don't need to use precise language. You can still get really useful feedback back from the vector database. Anyway, this is also where we're going to get back to this, I guess, when we have open questions. This is the first place where you, as a publisher, if there's any publisher in the audience, this is the first point where you should claim ownership. The embedding is the book. It's another edition of the book. First claim of ownership. The disks thing here is the vector database. So what I wanted to show here is that the first step also uses a language model in many cases. It doesn't need to, but nowadays it does. So it gets turned into numbers. That's where the abacus, is it abacus? Abacus, thank you. It sounded wrong in my head. It's stored in the vector database. What we now can do, again, you don't need to. You can just stop here and use the vector database because it's a wonderful thing, being able to use like semantic search. But what most people do now is to then, once it's stored in the database, the user can open a book, just like Paul showed us, and then ask a question to the chat session. the chat session, which is of course part of the GPT thingamajiggy, will tokenize that question. Tokenize just means making numbers of your questions. Sending that, also picking up and helping you. This is also where, I'm going to get to this in a bit, but the reason we are starting to use tools like RAG and so on to help us with our AI friends is that they are not really that smart. They have a good, they are really good at like trying to get us to think that they're smart, but nah. So we need actual real-world data that actually like comes empirically, like proven proper data from our domain, whatever it may be. So we're mainly using the AI, except for creating the language embedding, of course, for the book. But here, we're mainly using it as a way for us to use natural language to communicate with a system. So what happens is that our question gets sent to the robot, which turns our question into like something that you could use as a query for your vector database. The vector database makes a similarity search, which means again, you can talk round about something, and you will still get hopefully a meaningful answer, which are actually chunks of content from the book, from all over the book. It could be like from many chapters. The good thing about this is in the process that we had before, we actually have a way now to reference back to the book, which is wonderful. It's part kind of built into the workflow using the vector database, which means that if you instruct the model properly, and they've been like fine-tuned to do this now, you can actually make it return something that you then can actually validate the reference for in the book contents. And then you can return the answer back to the user and be at least in many cases fairly sure that it isn't lying to you, which is still a problem that all of these models have. No matter what the person trying to sell the idea of using a GPT model, it's hype to a large degree. You need to remember this. It's all about managing expectations and being very clear that it's far from perfect. You can use more layers of like what's called agents now, which is basically guardrails that you can put in place on the back end by asking more, and maybe even having, what's it called? You can ask many different sources and check for truthiness, for example, and so on. Anyway, so what I did last year, or it must be more than a year now. It's interesting because I implemented something very like what Paul showed before, which is basically a feature that I call Book Talk. Book Talk is an interesting experiment also, because what it does is that it, on the client actually, it turns the book into like a simplified version. It still keeps all the semantic and everything, but it tidies up the book, basically, and sends it for embedding in the vector database. So this is something that happens ad hoc. This is not how you would implement it, but you could. The good thing about this is that any book that is opened, basically, can be used for chatting. In any case, so that's the first thing that happens. The next thing here, anybody here interested in Greek mythology? It sounds like something you would be really interested in. Gregorio, please bring it on. Oh, please come here. Yes, you are now part of the show. And write your question here.
Where is the question mark?
Was this the best? Okay. Sorry. It's multi. Blah, blah. And now I'm going to talk for a bit because it takes a while. Again, this is part of the retrieval thingy. It adds to the latency of the system. Also, if I paid like $1 million, it would probably be faster. I'm paying, while it's generating, pay for this. Don't ever use an AI service that you don't pay for, because they are going to steal your data. Oh, yes. So we got a response. What do you say, you expert?
I'm not that expert. I mean, the question was quite simple, but
yes.
Yeah.
But thank you. Thank you for participation.
Welcome.
Participation. Yes.
Was to help you.
Gregorio, thank you. Yes, and now we have our answer. If I had a screen reader on now, because remember, this was a feature that I added for screen reader users to be able to search through books and easily discover content. So if I was a screen reader user now, this would have been read out to me. Also, to make it easier for screen reader users, the references which I have linked here also show up in this list here, so you can jump directly to them. This improved vastly over the previous like 12 months. This is the big step forward. I'm not sure when this is going to happen again, but this is important because previously it failed with the citations thing. And I even when I used the most expensive models from these companies, it always failed almost. Not always, but like 7 out of 10 times it failed. And if it gave me something, it wasn't even like a paraphrasing. Sometimes it just lied. In this case, it's become so much better. And I think I told the people who I met at the London Book Fair that I was like flabbergasted by this. This makes it actually useful. Like Paul said, you can build a commercial product around this. You still need to very clearly say that there may be hallucination in the text. So you'll need to double check everything because it's still a large language model and they are prone to be creative sometimes. In any case, all of these are also validated, so you can go to them, of course, and do the following. It also highlights, thanks to the power of CFI, exactly where in the text we can find the link. I also added a thingamajiggy where you can do this and just ask a specific question about a quote. While it's thinking, I should say also that the next experiment I will do is to use other ways of getting data to the chat session, which are more fine-grained than this. And that's use a graph database instead. So have more domain-specific knowledge that is actually maybe based on Wikipedia or something to add to this. Because, yes. Nice. Again, the more context you give to the chat session, the more it has to constrain it, to rein it in. Yeah, I almost forgot. What I added also just last week was that I added that before, when I give the session its initial instruction, I give it all the metadata that is in the book, formatted as Markdown, because apparently that's a thing now for how they have trained the models. So you give all the metadata, all the fields as Markdown. I also give it the entire table of contents, so that it, again, in the best of cases at least, or in these kinds of book at least, where you have, which is learning material, higher education, and so on, you often have a meaningful outline. Meaningful headings, which can also help it to constrain its its grasp of what it's trying to generate. Or it's getting tight. But I think I'm done now. But again, I've nerded out quite a bit when it comes to this kind of, and I'm in basically very skeptical about this, which I think is also helpful. So yeah. But this is how you can build something yourself. Also, I'm not that smart, and I built this in a week. It's not as fancy as Paul's, but it's not impossible for you to start to play around with yourselves.
All right, it's me again, sorry. Where's the presentation? There we go. So, we're going to be focusing on AI-generated image descriptions. Why this? Well, it's useful from an accessibility perspective. There are many publications out there in EPUB format that contain images. Many of these images don't include an alt attribute summarizing what the image is, let alone extended descriptions that go a bit deeper into the context or the meaning of the image and its embedding context. So it's useful from an accessibility perspective, but also just for general use. It's interesting to be able to discover more about content in the book, and we decided to focus on images more specifically. So first of all, this is work in progress. It's an unreleased experiment. So what you're going to see is not shipped in official releases, nor is it shipped in our automated builds. It's in what we call a code branch. You can compile it, it's open source, but it's likely to crash, which is why I'm deciding to do a demo again. So let's switch over to Thorium. Same Thorium that was running earlier on. Same book, in fact. I like this book because it has an illustration here of Phileas Fogg. How do I know that? Well, because there's a caption below the image. It's actually just a very short piece of text that says Phileas Fogg. So I'm assuming that's the person in the illustration, not the illustrator. Or in this case, I don't know what technique is used. Perhaps it's a drawing, I'm not sure. Well, we can discover that. Maybe the AI will help us. What's interesting about this book, too, is that authors, the creators of this HTML document, essentially, they very kindly included an affordance. An affordance is like a button, if you will, or a link that I can click on. So in this case, it's this little symbol here. Well, I'm quite curious, so I'm going to click on it. Well, it seems like it's taken me to a different chapter in the book, much like a footnote, if you will, or an endnote. And here they're including the picture again, okay, but there's no description there. It's not really helping me. There is a back button. Okay, that's very handy. It's taking me back to where I was. It's not, as you can see, it's a nice effort, but it's not quite there yet in terms of what's available in the book for me to try and understand what the picture is for. The other thing I'll notice here, and I'll open the web inspector so we can all see the source code. So this is HTML. You can see that there is an alt attribute, but it's empty. Now, for those of you who don't know, that means that it's telling us that the image is decorative, that it doesn't really, it doesn't help comprehend the book. It doesn't has anything of value to the reader other than to decorate maybe spacing between two paragraphs. Well, that's highly incorrect because that picture is actually very much part of the content and it should have an alt attribute. So this is what we would call a presentational role, a semantic role, which is missing, by the way. You can see there's no... I'm also noticing the title is empty. That's interesting. Probably legal as well in terms of the HTML syntax. But interestingly, if I go back to the book, again, go to the chapter where they show me the picture outside of its text context. And if I look at the source code, oh, there is now an alt attribute, but it says linked image. Well, that's not very useful, is it? It's not really, and I'm assuming all the other images in the book have that alt attribute. So it's completely useless. A blind screen reader user will hear that. And that's going to be very confusing. We can ignore it because we don't see it, but a blind reader will hear it. So, going back to the book. So, we thought, what if we could introduce a new feature whereby when an image is selected or clicked in the book, such as now, I can sort of go into a separate window and learn more about that image. Now, this functionality exists in Thorium already. It's what we call our image zoom feature. So I can zoom in, sort of zoom out, and pan, it's what you expect. In this user interface, we've added, for the purpose of that prototype, that demonstration, so it's highly unfinished, it's ugly as hell, as you can tell already, but we added the authored descriptions to which there are none. So we say no authored descriptions. Okay, so that's helpful. But I now have an additional button in the user interface where I can chat with an AI model. To be precise, a visual large language model. So if you come across this acronym of VLLM, that's what it is. At the moment, we have a selection of 5 models. It's actually 3. There's Gemini from Google, 2.5 Pro, and 2 different variants of it. We also have OpenAI GPT-4o Mini. If you know anything about large language models, naming is terrible, especially OpenAI. They have GPT-3o03. It's very confusing. That's the mini version as well. And then we also have Mistral AI, Pixtral in this case. All of these models are running in the cloud. None of this is local. And so if you're not familiar with the term, it's called inference. Inference means interrogating the model. So this all happens online. I depend on an internet connection for this to work right now. We did try to run local models. It sort of worked. The quality wasn't there. And the reason being, they're usually quite small, only a few gigabytes. And inference can be quite slow as well on a local computer. So we use, I think Lars said it, just pay for a good service. Don't try and run your local LLM unless you really, really know what you're doing. So to get some degree of quality, I'm using an online model, and because there's no description, I'm going to use one of the canned actions here, one for short description, the other for an extended description. So let's go with short. So what we're seeing here is the response from the model streaming in. I'm sure at that point in time, you're all familiar with the chat interface with models. So speech bubbles, alternating speech bubbles. So the response comes, and this is Mistral. It's not very useful. It's just telling me there's somebody wearing black in the picture, probably from the 19th century, so not very useful. If I try the extended description, okay, it's adding a bit more information, but it's still quite anonymous. I'm not sure the model knows that this is Phileas Fogg. In fact, it doesn't, if I read again. No. So what happened here is those canned actions, short and extended descriptions, they're essentially prompts. I'm prompting the model using predefined prompts that are shipped with Thorium, one for short, one for long. But it's a chat interface. I could just type in whatever I want in there, and it would I could continue the conversation down. Now, let's try another model, which I think will be a lot more successful at identifying who is in the picture. So I'm going to reset the chat. By the way, this is called the context window. When you interact with a model, you kind of feed in information incrementally, and that's the context window, and it grows and it grows and it grows until it reaches a certain point where, there is a limit in terms of the size of the context window. So let's try again with Gemini. It should be a little slower. Sometimes it even doesn't work, but I believe we still have some credits. We paid for this. It better work. Okay, well, whilst we wait, I'm going to talk to you about what we call the system prompt. So all models, cloud models and local ones, have their own system prompt. That's how they're tuned to be civil and not teach you how to make a nuclear bomb, for example. But we have our own as well. The initial information we feed to the model is our own system prompt, and it's just to set the initial parameters. So we ask the model to stick to describing the picture, avoid talking about different subjects, like, an earache I have and I'd like to talk to a doctor or something like that. And also we're asking the model to focus not only on the contents of the image, but also on some meta information about the image, such as its embedding context in the document, in the book. And also tell us more about who is the illustrator in this image, or who is the photographer, these sorts of things. Give us more information about the historical context, the artistic merits, technological explanations, things of that nature. This prompt, this system prompt, is editable. As a user of Thorium, I can just add my own things in there. So we're not, locking you into a particular way of thinking. It's just nice to be able to customize all of this. Now, going back to the response here from Gemini, it did a much better job, because it's not only telling me that it's Phileas Fogg, but also the book it belongs to. Yes, that's the correct book. And The French artist Léon Bennett. Okay, so it even knows who created that picture. Now, before I move on to the extended description for this, and there's going to be quite a lot coming through, I want to show you that with the advanced models, we can actually feed in a bit more context in the system prompt. So here, for example, as opposed to just setting the basic boundaries of what we expect from the model, I'm also feeding it some context. I'm using JSON as a syntax, but Lars told us, nowadays you can use Markdown. It's fairly well supported. Actually, XML works surprisingly well with models. They love XML when you structure information with it. But anyway, in this prototype, we're using JSON, and you can see we just give it the title of the publication, the author, publishers, well, there's none there, languages, that's an important variable, because not only, well, I'm French, but I use my software here is all in English, but this book is in French. I've got another book in Spanish, Mexican Spanish, in fact. So we need to tell the AI, well, I understand English, or I'm comfortable with you responding to me in English, but really the book is, in a different language. So that's interesting too. We also feed it a little bit of text before the image and a little bit of text after. This is still very much prototypal. We're not sure yet how to go about this, but we thought it'd be interesting to see how the model responds with that extra information. And we give it all the attributes we can find that potentially contain descriptions. Like I mentioned the alt attribute, but there's another one called labeled by, described by, title, area label. There's a bunch of them, so it's interesting to feed the model with them. All right, let's click on extended description, and hopefully Gemini would come back to us quick. So whilst this is happening, I'm going to... Oh, no, it's still... Okay, so I'll come back to that later. So the user experience, in a nutshell, I mentioned it this morning, articulates around three main principles. First of all, allow the user to see the existing authored short and extended descriptions, if there are any, to chat with the AI model, to dynamically obtain descriptions and contextual information, and thirdly, to hyperlink into external web resources for further analysis and search. So we don't want to lock the user into our experience. Obviously, we need an escape hatch for further extensions. There we are. Okay, great. So that's the response from Gemini, and it's giving me a ton of interesting details here. But what I'm going to do now, given I've just talked about the escape hatch, is show you how that works. So for example, let's just select a piece of text from the response. Yeah, there we go. So I'm going to select black and white illustration captures the essence of Phileas Fogg. Just select the text like this, and you can see the icons in these corners, one for Wikipedia and one for Google search. Again, this is just a prototype. Don't think it's a finished product. But if I click on the Google search one, hopefully, Firefox is running somewhere. There we are. I just fed the Google search engine with a fragment of text, and obviously it is going to find the picture that I'm looking at, because it's in the public domain in this case, so it was quite easy. So the point that I'm making here is that intellectual property and protecting IP is an important topic, especially at EDRLab. We have the LCP DRM, and it would be all too easy to exfiltrate content, either textual or images, high-resolution images from the content. So in order to avoid that, we decided not to allow the user to simply grab the image and feed it into a different system, but to first interact with the AI and use what the AI generates, the response from the AI, and then exfiltrate that into... Now, let's be honest here. We all know nowadays we can make a screenshot or take a picture of my screen and send that to an AI, and basically that's it. The IP is gone out. But in Thorium, we just don't want to facilitate that just yet. And Laurent presented to you this morning, TDM. There's all sorts of evolving standards around the issue of protecting IP. Okay, so design requirements, we wanted to dedicate some piece of the user interface. In this case, we chose a modal overlay that's separate from the normal reading activity. In fact, Paul mentioned that in his presentation. But in his demo, though, it was sort of side by side. In our case, because we deal with images, we decided to just show it in an overlay outside of the normal reading experience. we just want a familiar chat interface with a very basic feature set. I mean, if you want, full-fat AI chat, you better use the leading products in the market. We just want to keep it simple here. And of course, I did mention the escape hatch already. The prompting method, as I said, a default system one to scope the task and feed initial parameters, but it can be customized. And then the default prompt short and extended, for iterative conversation or one shot. So you may have heard that term before with LLMs, with models. You can have one shot, essentially interaction, question-answer type, or you can expand on that and have a proper conversation. But as you do that, the context window grows, and there are pros and cons when doing this. Now, what's currently out of scope is MCP, Model Context Protocol, for calling other tools and interconnecting AI systems. RAG is also completely out of scope. What we're doing is kind of RAG, but not really. We're just feeding an initial state in the context window. We're not really indexing anything. We're not creating vector databases. We're not in the business of doing this, at least that's the vision for now. And I've already mentioned local LLMs didn't quite work out, so we're going to focus on proper commercial ones with free trials or pay-as-you-go type systems. So the way it works is that we bring the acronym that you'll see is bring your own key. So the demo you saw there, I had a file in which I had my API keys for OpenAI, Google, and Mistral, and Thorium picked them up, and it activated those models. So I've already talked about the embedding context of the image and how to feed metadata to the system. Yeah, so some of the risks with this, well, publication can contain incorrect data. I mean, if I feed the model incorrect metadata, like the alt attribute we saw earlier, and that could be much worse, the text before, the text after, could be completely irrelevant to the image itself. We're going to amplify the hallucinations that the LLM is already quite likely to produce. So that's why we make it all editable. An advanced user can customize what we feed to the AI just to avoid these kinds of false positives, if you will. And I think I had prepared screenshots just in case none of that worked, but I think I showed you everything now. Oh, okay, this one. Very quickly, the W3C created and is maintaining a test suite for EPUB. One of the test books is one about extended descriptions, how to best implement as a content creator extended descriptions. And in this example here, we have a picture which has an alt attribute, but it also has a collapsible and expandable area of content below it, which shows a great level of detail to what is in picture. And if I run that through the model, it'll be fed a lot more pertinent information about the picture because there's already an extended description for that picture. So I'm amplifying positively in this case because I'm really giving the AI a bit of help to start with. In fact, what I've highlighted here is that it used the metadata from the book. It knows that the author of that EPUB is the DAISY consortium and the W3C and the diagram and all that. So feeding context is definitely useful if the data is correct. And that is it. Thank you.